Thanks for joining. I'm Senator Emily Randall, and I represent the 26th Legislative District in beautiful Bremerton, Port Orchard, Gig Harbor, and the Key Peninsula. And I'm so glad that you are spending some time on your Saturday morning to join me for my second town hall of this 2022 legislative session. Big thanks to those of you who sent in your questions in advance. We got a great number of pre-submitted questions. We've got some questions that have come in from a lot of folks via email. You also, just a reminder for those of you watching live, can drop your questions in the comments of Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching this live stream, and we will try to answer as many of those live questions as we can today. Got a lot of stuff to discuss, and I'm so excited to be able to do it with you, with my community, online safely. You know, in the past, we've had a chance to have town halls in different regions of our district, at Olympic College and at TCC Gig Harbor, at Key Peninsula Community Center, but we're just not quite there yet for, large in-person town halls, and wonders of technology are allowing us to do this safely this morning. So thanks for tuning in. So for the agenda, quick overview, I'll give you a brief overview of my roles and responsibilities in the legislature. Then we'll dive into those questions. Again, please feel free to drop your questions in the comment section of whatever streaming service you're watching on. And if you want to email us, you can send that to emily.leg.wa.gov with the subject line virtual town hall question. And my staff is monitoring all of these different places where you could ask your question, and we'll try to get to them. So before we dive in, I'd like to tell you a little bit about session so far. We are just past day 40 of our 60-day legislative session, and we also just passed some important deadlines. You might have heard folks talk about cutoff, which bills made it past cutoff, and that means a deadline in which bills needed to be at a certain point. We just had our House of Origin policy cutoff last Tuesday, which was the last day that bills introduced in the Senate that aren't budget bills had to have passed through policy committee and off the Senate floor in order to stay alive for the rest of session and make their way over to the House. We've also had a lot of virtual public testimony this year, just like last year. We pivoted to allowing community members to use Zoom to testify in committee, and it's been incredibly successful. In the Senate so far this legislative session, we have had 3,027 individuals to testify. And for a little context, last year in 2021, which is a longer session by 45 days, we had 3,690 folks total. So we're seeing a huge increase in folks using their voices through this virtual model where people can testify on policy from their couch, from the break room at work, as they walk to the bus, whether or not they have childcare. This is a really important accessibility issue that's allowing us to reach more people and bringing in the voices of more neighbors all across the state. For the number of bills that my office and my team sent over to the House before the cutoff deadline, we still have 11 bills alive, which is really exciting in a short session to be able to have that much policy still moving. I also have a couple of companion bills to House movers, we call them. So, when you have two similar policies start in each chamber, they don't both make it to the governor's desk, but as long as the policy gets to the governor's desk, I don't always, have a real preference that it be my name on the bill. I think it's just important that we focus on the good policy. All right. So for those of you who don't know, much about me and the committees I serve in the legislature, I have the great honor of chairing the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee. That's where we set policy around college and workforce pathways. We work a lot on affordability and accessibility and ensuring that we are getting closer to our state's 70% post-high school credential attainment goal. We want folks graduating high school in Washington to get some kind of credential, whether that's a college degree, a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a certificate, an apprenticeship. We want folks to be able to enter from high school into pathways to living wage jobs and to successful careers. And so that's where we focus a lot on that work. I also serve on the Health and Long-Term Care Committee, where I used to serve as vice chair until I joined the small leadership team as caucus whip. And I serve on the Transportation Committee, and I'm a co-chair of our Gorst Coalition here in community, and in the 26th and 35th and 23rd partnership that I work on with Congressman Kilmer and many local leaders. And I've also been a member of our transportation team's negotiating team as we negotiate a transportation package with our colleagues in the House this past year. As I mentioned, I serve as caucus whip, which is a role in what we call small leadership. That's with our majority leader, our caucus chair, our deputy majority leaders. And it's an important opportunity for me to bring the voices and concerns of our community and also help make sure that our policy priorities are moving smoothly through the process. So I talked about cutoff, and real quickly, I'm going to tell you about some of our bills that made it past cutoff and have been sent over to the House. One of our priorities this session was a just economy for all. And, three policy bills I have in that space are Senate Bill 5726, which is resolving a pension shortfall for military service members, ensuring that folks who are public employees get pension credit for the time that they are deployed in military service. And we had done some things to fix that, what's called disruptive military service, but there's more to do to ensure that, firefighters who go on deployment are able to get pension credit for their time that time that they're away from their public employee job. We also are continuing our work around disability pay equity and building on our policy last year to end the practice of paying sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities. We are ending the practice of paying sub-prevailing wage for workers with disabilities. There are currently no sub-prevailing wage waivers being used in Washington state, and so it felt like a really good time to take that off the books, that discriminatory practice of undervaluing workers with disabilities. I also have a pay equity or pay transparency bill that requires employers to disclose upfront in the job description their salary range. I've hired a number of times, and I think it's important that we tell folks what our hiring range that we have in mind is. Another priority bucket for us is healthy families and healthy communities. And so I've been working particularly around reproductive health care access. I have a bill on midwives, ensuring that licensed midwives in Washington are able to prescribe important medications to their patients, whether that's an antibiotic during pregnancy or post-birth, an antifungal, or an immediate postpartum contraception, so that folks who give birth with midwives' assistance are able to get the care from that trusted provider instead of having to seek out a new provider to get the care they need. I also have a bill strengthening abortion rights in Washington, ensuring that we have a strong network of providers who are able to safely provide those abortion services. This is really important to me as we're seeing continued attacks on reproductive freedom all across the country. I've been working on education and opportunity for all, both as chair of the Higher Education Committee and also as a really committed first-generation college graduate, ensuring that we have good pathways to those living wage jobs for workers across Washington, for workers of all ages. And some of the things that we're doing are around apprenticeship programs. Some of the policy is around in ensuring that folks have access to meaningful financial aid that they can use. We're looking at wraparound services and supports. And I also have a small bill around our faculty ethics policy, because I learned, surprisingly, that almost every faculty member in Washington is in violation of our state ethics law, because we expect, and I think this isn't news to a lot of people, faculty members to publish However, Washington's law says that they're in violation of the ethics law if they accept, royalties or fees for that work. So we're coming up with directing our Council of Presidents, which works with the four-year colleges and the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, to come up with new regulations that allow our faculty members to do their work without being in violation of the law. And we're also working on investing in infrastructure. I have a bill that we'll talk more about later, Senate Bill 5488, that is lowering the Tacoma Narrows Bridge tolls. So lots of exciting stuff happening. Can't wait to answer more of your questions. So let's jump right in. Hannah, do you want to share one of our pre-submitted questions?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. And as a quick reminder, anyone at any time, if you've joined us recently, can drop questions in the comments below this video, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. But one of the questions that several of our neighbors have sent in pertains to the Safe Streets Town Hall that you participated in earlier this week. Folks are wondering if you can share a little bit more about what came up at that town hall and how you're working with both community members and members of law enforcement.
Thanks so much for that question, folks. I was really honored to join our neighbors and organizers with Safe Streets for a great conversation on Thursday about an issue that's important to all of us, public safety. I was joined by Councilmember Derek Young from Pierce County, folks from Safe Streets, folks from the faith community, Pierce County Prosecutor Mary Robinette. It was a great conversation in which, everyone was coming together to figure out how we can work together to keep our communities safe. And in that conversation, as well as my own approach to policy making, I think striking a balance is really important. We heard from, our law enforcement and legal experts lending their perspectives. We learned what is working for law enforcement and what challenges there are, and folks have shared what keeps communities of color and marginalized communities safe and feeling a sense of trust in the system. And let me back up a little bit and talk about some of the policy work that we've done in public safety. In 2021, there was a national public outcry from particularly communities of color, who have been systemically and unjustly targeted and unjustly treated by law enforcement. Most of us watched on the news as at least one person, if not many more, depending on when we were watching, died at the hands of law enforcement. And that inspired action. It inspired community outcry, and it inspired Washington to be a leader in thinking about how we can protect our communities and create, reforms to our system that will keep all of us safer. But I think this is often the case when you're out in front leading in policy. We realized we needed to make some clarifications. And over the last year, I've had many conversations with law enforcement agencies in our community and statewide, with neighbors. I've watched our community Facebook pages as folks, respond to instances of crime, which I think our crime statistics are not spiking in the way many folks feel like they are. But one thing that we're noticing is that we're seeing a higher instance of folks publicly reporting. So we each see on the news and in the community Facebook groups we're in, robberies and other instances of crime that in previous years, we wouldn't all have seen as clearly. So there are some increases in property crime that I think we are also working to address, but I just want to kind of lay that foundation out there that because we see more of it doesn't mean the rates are spiking so much higher. But we know we need to take action. We need to support our first responders, our community caretakers who are out there wanting to serve and protect, but who feel like they are unsure about what the law allows them to do. So this year, we're working to clarify and revise those laws so that we don't create barriers to law enforcement doing their jobs. I have sponsored Senate Bill 5919, which is a policy that clarifies use of force and allows some additional practice of pursuit that has frustrated many law enforcement members and community members. And I signed on to that after many conversations with Chief Busey from the Gig Harbor Police Department, with folks from Bremerton, Port Orchard, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, as well as other statewide police organizations and colleagues, to make sure we're striking a balance and ensuring that we're not rolling back too far, but that we're giving important clarifications, as the Attorney General asked us to do, around use of force. And, this work is really important to me personally because I think, as a lot of you know, I come from a Latino family. My cousin, Sheriff Rosie Rivera, is the first woman of color sheriff of Salt Lake County Sheriffs. And she is an amazing leader who serves with honor, integrity, and dedication. I'm so proud of her. And my grandpa, her uncle, has had experiences at the hands of law enforcement that were violent and biased. He has been, thrown to the ground in his lifetime during a violent routine traffic stop. And those stories are true for too many of our neighbors. And so I try to hold that balance as I work to reform and fight for justice, to ensure that law enforcement has the tools that they need to do their job, and to ensure that they also have the training, as we invested in at the Criminal Justice Training Center, to de-escalate and to engage in community caretaking without bias. And so that's the tough work that we have ahead of us this year. 5919 has made it over to the House, and the Senate has received, I can't remember the number. I'm not going to make it up because it would be wrong, a bill from Representative Jesse Johnson that also deals with use of force. So before session is over, we'll have passed one of these pieces of policy and ensured that our law enforcement officers are able to do their jobs, and our community members feel safe, and that we do it in a way that builds trust in our communities.
Great. Thanks, Senator. Many folks in your district and throughout the state have also inquired about economic recovery and the state of our budget outlook. What's some of the work being done to help Washington fully recover economically?
That's a really good question, and one I'm excited to answer. We've been through so much these last 2 years, families and communities and neighbors really struggling with the economic impacts of COVID, the health impacts of COVID. And so part of our job as a legislature has been working to get money out to folks as quickly as we're able. And last legislative session, we invested $240 million to fund 12,000 grants for small businesses right at the beginning of 2021. And then another $138 million in additional funding at the end of the legislative session. That ended up being over $28 million just in Working Washington small business grants to Kitsap and Pierce County. Those business grants were essential to keeping businesses open and to supporting the families of small business owners. We also made sure that people could stay in their homes. We distributed $31 million in rental assistance in Pierce County, serving 4,240 households, and $4.1 million in Kitsap County, serving 838 households. This is a part of our work to ensure that communities recover equitably and quickly. And keeping our community safe and thriving in a place that nurtures people, just like I was nurtured growing up in this community, is really, really important to me. And, in addition to that emergency assistance that we passed and distributed, we have the work before us every year to pass a budget that and multiple budgets that are statements of our values, providing assistance to families and programs with the most need, investing in community projects that bring jobs and services to our neighbors, and ensuring that our streams and estuaries and forests are well cared for and resilient. And so, for folks who don't know, we pass three budgets every year: a capital budget, an operating budget, and a transportation budget. And the big budgets are biennial, which means every 2 years. The 2 year the biggest version is passed in the odd years of the biennium, the first year of the biennium, the long sessions, 105 days. And the supplemental budget, where we make adjustments and invest in emerging needs, passes in the short sessions or the even years. And we're in one of those now. So this year, we're working to pass the supplemental capital budget, the supplemental operating budget, and the supplemental transportation budget, in addition to a transportation package. And from 2019 to 2021, I've worked really hard to balance the needs of our very different communities, from the Key Peninsula to Port Orchard, Bremerton to Gig Harbor. There are different needs in every community. And so I try to make sure that we're requesting and securing projects in each of the budgets that kind of covers the breadth of our community. And we're working on a map, interactive map that you'll be able to use to look at our budget wins over the last few years. But for now, I want to say that we brought in a total of $41.7 million in capital construction funding for projects in our district from 2019 to 2021. That's not including the work that we'll do before the end of session this year. But those projects have given back to veterans and seniors who built our community. $4 million in AC and building demolitions at the Retzel Veterans Home, which, if you visited a loved one there recently, or if you work there, is in need of work. $1 million for the Mustard Seed Senior Living Project, which broke ground last summer and is such an exciting way to allow seniors to age in place on the Key Peninsula. We care for the health of our neighbors by investing $2 million towards the Gig Harbor Fish Food Bank's new facility last year, and Peninsula Community Health Services dental access all across the 26th LD. And we've invested in fun and exciting community improvements, like the Gateway Park Splash Pad, which received $500,000, and the South Kitsap Community Event Center that had received $1.2 million in planning funding. And I'm so proud to partner with local organizations who are doing this incredible work and to ensure that our biennial budget invests in every corner of our district. The Senate's proposed 2022 capital budget was just released this week. And in addition, to landmark investments in homelessness and affordable housing at $472 million statewide, broadband at $120 million statewide, natural resources and clean water at $372 million statewide, and school seismic safety grants at $115 million statewide. Each member office received this year, around $300,000 in local and community projects. And what that looks like for us is $60,000 for the Gig Harbor Foundation Senior Center to build capacity and be able to serve community. $100,000 for Harper Estuary restoration and bridge construction in South Kitsap across from Harper Pier at the beginning of Olympia Drive. And $165,000 for Kiwanis Park playground accessibility upgrades. If you've been to some of the accessible parks, like at Evergreen, you know that we have improvements to make to allow kids in wheelchairs or grandparents in wheelchairs and other folks to be able to use and play on our play structures safely. And this is an exciting accessibility update that will allow more people to use this great playground facility. We also are really lucky to have had the governor, capital budget chairs, and local school districts and leaders work to secure $30 million for the West Sound Technical Skills Center. This isn't a member project, local and community project. This is the first of many of our skill centers that are going to need serious renovation over the next decade. And West Sound Technical Skill Center is the first one to receive this kind of significant investment. And we're really excited because young people from Pierce County to Clallam and Jefferson County use the Skill Center to be able to get the training that they need to enter the workforce, sometimes right after high school graduation. This is really important work to ensure that students have access to the technological and skills training that they need to build their careers. And it's really exciting. And the building is really old and leaking and, not modernized to accommodate the jobs of not only today, but tomorrow. And so this investment will go a long way in ensuring that students have the kind of education that they need to be successful. I also have a couple policies that I'll mention, or one in specific policy that I haven't mentioned yet, that is part of building a stronger economy, and that's Senate Bill 5901, which is a tax deferral for manufacturing facilities. Currently, we have a manufacturing facility tax credit that allows only the biggest manufacturing facilities to take advantage. You have to have currently over 400,000 square feet in order to qualify. And so we're lowering the square footage for manufacturing facilities to qualify for this grant, but also capping the tax deferral amount so that we're not just giving big tax write-offs to big business, but we're ensuring that small local manufacturing facilities are able to get the incentives and the tax deferrals that they need in order to help in our goal of doubling our manufacturing employment base in the state. And we're well on our way, but this is a helpful tool to ensure that we have good local jobs and local communities and the businesses get some of the support that they need. So that's like a lot about the budget. Please feel free to ask me more questions via email. We can answer your specific questions about budget allocations and direct you to the documents on the OFM website. They're called LEAP lists, budget itemized lists, and they're really fun to nerd out on if you like budgets. So let us know if you have more questions. But for now, I'll ask Hannah to ask the next one from a viewer.
Great. Thanks, Senator. I'm actually going to join you on camera really quick just to remind and welcome the folks who are new that you can drop your questions and comments in the chat or on Twitter or on YouTube, wherever you may be watching. Our next question is from a viewer named Robert. I'm going to put your question on the screen here, Robert. And it also lines up well with a question from Steve from Gig Harbor. Both have asked about transportation. And Robert's question specifically is what's going on with ferries? And Steve wants to know what else is in the transportation proposal that recently came out and how is it funded?
Thanks so much for those questions, Robert and Steve. And I'm sure a lot of folks are wondering about ferries. So I want to start and acknowledge that Bremerton has been on a one boat schedule for a long time. And in fact, this morning, the 6:20 ferry was canceled with very little, if no notice, and the 8:45 was delayed. And that is so disruptive to our neighbors. I don't have to depend on it for commuting, but I know so many neighbors and constituents that do. Folks who depend on the ferries to get to work, folks who depend on the ferries to get to school, folks who depend on the ferries to get to their medical appointments. Our marine highways are an essential part of our infrastructure, and for too long, they have been underfunded. We have operations challenges with the ferries around the way that our staffing structure is funded. We have problems with recruitment and training. We have challenges keeping our boats staffed at the levels that are required by the Coast Guard. We also have too few ferries because we haven't been building them fast enough. And for all of those reasons and more, I have signed on to a transportation infrastructure investment package every year that I've been in the legislature. From my first year, when my colleagues well-meaningly tried to discourage me from signing on to tax and revenue bills, I was committed to ensuring that we exhausted every avenue to invest the monies that we needed, not only in our ferry system, but in our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure more broadly. I hear from folks all the time about the maintenance and preservation of our roads being underfunded. I hear from, neighbors with disabilities who struggle to navigate our underfunded public transit system. I hear from folks who have safety concerns about our roads, and I hear from neighbors who are overburdened by paying the tolls on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in order for them to commute to work, to commute to childcare, to visit their families. Folks make tough choices because our community is paying more in transportation costs than other communities along the I-5 corridor or across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Our costs are higher, as shown in a Department of Health disparities map. And I can link that map in the comments, or post a screenshot of it because it's kind of challenging to navigate. But it shows very clearly that we're paying more, and that isn't fair. And so I've been working as a member of the transportation negotiating team in the Senate Democratic Caucus to get us to a package that we can pass this session that invests in those areas that have long been underfunded. And there is a lot to celebrate in the Move Ahead Washington transportation package that was recently announced. It's a first of its kind package that invests nearly $75 million to respond to our community's needs in Gorst, to design a climate resilient traffic solution in partnership with community and in consultation with the Suquamish tribe. Local leaders from all around the region have joined with me and Congressmember Derek Kilmer, business leaders, city council members, county council members, neighbors, the Department of Defense to think about what we need and figure out how we can secure that funding. So $75 million for Gorse is huge and is going to go a long way in fixing that traffic mess that is not only about capacity, but it's also about sea level rise and the threat of earthquake that will completely cut off the peninsula. We've also invested in this Move Ahead Washington transportation package, $6.5 million for a Kitsap Transit all-electric fast ferry for our fast ferry system. This is a super exciting nation-leading approach that's going to ensure that we are also more climate resilient in our fast ferry system. Now, this isn't the state ferries. Folks who are local know that our Kitsap Transit Ferry is a separate program, but allows so many folks to commute from Southworth, from Kingston, from Bremerton to Seattle, and is really meaningful in connectivity. And shout out to so many of the local leaders that made that possible on the ballot years ago. We've invested $1.5 billion in our state's struggling ferry system to respond to both the immediate and the long-term needs. That looks like building new boats. It looks like converting from diesel to electric in some boats. It looks like electrifying the shore dock facilities so that when we have electric boats, they can charge. It also looks like injecting really important money into our staffing and operations so that we can afford to have extra staff assigned to each boat so that when one person calls in sick, especially in the engine room, we're able to continue running. That's most frequently one of the challenges in last minute ferry cancellations is we have someone call in sick and we're not able to find a person to fill in, and we aren't meeting Coast Guard requirements. And that's a big challenge, but it's one we can solve if we spend our operation dollars wisely. And that's what Move Ahead Washington does. It invests in our ferry operations in addition to our ferry capital projects. There are $34 million in Move Ahead Washington for pedestrian safety improvements in Pierce County. And while not specifically in the transportation packages project list, as I mentioned before, I have a bill to lower the Tacoma Narrows Bridge tolls by 75 cents. Weren't able to get the full payoff of the bridge that I introduced, but I knew that was a big ask. And a 75% decrease is huge for our community, for folks who, commute back and forth across the bridge every week. That's a big decrease in their monthly budget, and will make it easier for folks to choose, to take classes at TCC or UW-Tacoma or any number of our higher education facilities in that side of Pierce County. It will broaden the options for folks considering childcare and on childcare waitlists. We heard from neighbors in Gig Harbor for whom, getting childcare in Tacoma would be faster than being able to get it, on the peninsula. We're trying to make the lives of everyday neighbors a little easier by this important reduction. Move Ahead of Washington also provides free fares for public transit for youth 18 and under, and that's by bus, train, and ferry. And it's really exciting that young people, kids, are going to be able to ride free and be more connected using the public transit systems. And Move Ahead Washington invests $120 million in Pierce County transit support and improvements, along with transit support and improvements in transit agencies across the state, and $3 billion to fund preservation and maintenance, along with $2.4 billion to heal our salmon population by removing fish passage barriers as required under the court order that we're in. So this is a big package. It does a lot of things. We're going to have a hearing on the spending portion of this bill later this week in Transportation Committee, or next week, I guess it's Saturday. And we'll drop a link for you to either sign in to testify in that hearing, or you can watch it live on TVW. It's a really exciting opportunity for you to use your voice in support of these essential investments. Earlier this week, on Tuesday, the Senate passed Senate Bill 5974, which was the revenue portion of this package. And I want to answer Steve's question about how this package is funded. We heard loud and clear from neighbors all across the state, and especially in our district, that raising gas tax was not a solution. That's how nearly every previous transportation has been funded, by a nickel gas tax or another gas tax, an increase on your gas tax at the pump. And while we had considered that last summer, by the time that we hit late summer, fall, we knew that that wasn't the answer for us this year. So Move Ahead Washington is funded by a one-time transfer from the state's general operating fund. It's funded by dollars and major investments from the Climate Commitment Act. It's funded by federal, some of our federal money, and it's funded currently with an excise tax on oil that's refined in Washington and exported to states like Idaho, Alaska, Montana, and Oregon. And the way that we decided this is that our folks in Washington are paying a higher gas tax than folks in those states, and we are dealing with the climate impacts of refining in our state. And it's not fair to export that fuel to other states without asking that they pay some of the social cost of the impact on climate and the impact on, the communities who live around our refineries. I think we still have some negotiations to do because, you may have seen tweets from Governor Kate Brown and, other electeds in Oregon who are really frustrated by this. But one thing that we know is that, there are Washingtonians who in Southwest Washington who live in Vancouver, but who commute and work in Oregon and are paying Oregon income taxes. And so, we want to make sure that we are building our transportation future in a way that has an equitable funding stream, and then that doesn't raise our gas taxes unnecessarily in Washington. And so gas tax is off the table for folks in Washington, and this is a creative solution that will allow us to invest the money that we need in Gorst, in our ferries, and our public transit.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Robert and Steve, for those questions. Um, Next, we have a question sent in by former Gig Harbor City Council member Frank Rufo. He wrote in to say he opposes mask mandates, and just a few days ago, the governor announced that the requirement to wear masks indoors will end on March 21st. Can you share some thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Frank, and thanks for tuning in. I hear such a broad range of feedback from neighbors on our mask mandates. I hear folks who want to end the requirement immediately. I hear folks who say that we should end the mask requirements as informed by cases declining and support March 21st. I hear from folks who want us to keep the requirement past March 21st, especially the parents of small kids under 5 who can't be vaccinated and who are now concerned about where they and their families can go in community. What we know is that cases and hospitalizations in our state are on the decline because what we've been doing is working. We masked indoors, we masked in large gatherings, and we worked remotely whenever possible. And the health of our community is largely recovering just as our economy is recovering. And it makes me, for one, feel really hopeful about a healthier future for all of us. But what we also know is that teachers and students are fearful of widespread infections at school. And teachers and students are also looking forward to seeing each other's smiles and getting the full extent of social emotional learning again. I personally will probably still wear a mask sometimes if I'm in a crowded space after March 21st. We're considering what our rules will be in the legislature moving forward. But I also respect and understand so many people who want to take their masks off when they don't need to wear them. I trust our compassionate community and our resilient community to keep looking out for each other, just like we've done these past 2 years. So we're just, about a month away from the end of the masking requirement. And I'm really excited about our community getting healthier and also our neighbors continuing to look out for each other.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, our next question was sent in live, and it's kind of long, so I'm going to put it on the screen and read it out loud, but I'll take it down after that because it sort of fills up a lot of the screen. So for folks viewing, here it is. Jeffrey asked, why is Kitsap County a Narcan desert? I recently needed Narcan and there was none available at commercial pharmacies. I was fortunate to have insurance, but what about everyone without insurance?
That's a good question, Jeffrey. And I'm sorry that you were in a position that, you were struggling to figure out how you would get the care that you need. But I'm glad that you had insurance. And I'm thankful that you're looking out for your neighbors who don't. Over the years, we've seen the tragic impact of the opioid epidemic. And it's crucial that we continue to provide access to harm reduction services like Narcan and other overdose reversal medications. Last year, we passed Senate Bill 5195 to make sure opioid reversal medications are more readily accessible. For folks who do not have insurance, this new law outlines that hospitals, licensed or certified behavioral health agencies, and pharmacies that provide opioid overdose reversal medication will bill the healthcare authority for reimbursement instead. So if you don't have insurance, you can still go to a hospital, a pharmacy, or another behavioral health agency to access this. Also in the bill, the healthcare authority is tasked with establishing a bulk purchasing and distribution program for opioid overdose reversal medication. This bill just went into effect in January, so we're still actively working on the rollout and following the program updates. But your question is a really good reminder that we have to continue to act with urgency to make sure that folks in Kitsap County and all across the state have immediate access. I also want to shout out, and I don't have the bill numbers in front of me right now, but we've had policy before the legislature around Narcan in middle and high schools and heard such poignant testimony from the parents of young people who experienced overdose and who wanted to make sure that our schools had access to that as well. And the same thing for law enforcement agencies, ensuring that they're carrying Narcan. Years ago, when I worked at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, our office was not only like a community drop-in center, but located in a part of the city where there was a great need to have experience using Narcan. And so every staff member got trained on how to administer Narcan, and we had it accessible in the building. And I think ensuring that we have the right emergency response at the right time is so important to keeping our community members safe.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question, Jeffrey. Our next question was sent in ahead of time by our neighbor, Marilyn from Gig Harbor, who asked, what are you doing to protect access to reproductive health care?
Thanks so much for that question, Marilyn. I touched a little bit on this before, but protecting reproductive rights and expanding access to reproductive justice is so important to me. And I'm really proud that Washington has a long-standing history of upholding our reproductive rights. Voters in 1991 voted to affirm the right to abortion and codify Roe v. Wade in our state constitution. We know that reproductive health care services is essential, and we are doing everything we can to ensure that Washingtonians have well-protected, meaningful access to reproductive health care when they need it. And because of that, we're working on the midwives bill that I mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 5765, and that passed off the Senate floor this last Tuesday and went over to the House, allowing licensed midwives the authority to prescribe contraception at the time of birth, and that could be oral birth control. It could also, depending on the training of the midwife, be an IUD or an implant. It also allows midwives to provide more comprehensive care for their pregnant and postpartum patients, including antibiotics for, say, mastitis, antifungals, and other medications that are common necessities during pregnancy and after birth. Amazing midwives from Washington, including some great birth workers from Kitsap County, have been strong champions of this policy because they know that they are uniquely positioned to provide care for their patients. And, my brother was born in our childhood bedroom that my mom, with the help of a midwife. And I was with my mom, I guess it was in 2018. Zach was 30 years after Zach was born. My mom and I ran into the midwife who was there at his birth. And it was incredible to see how that connection stood the test of time. And I think that's true for so many folks who choose midwives for their birth experiences, and for the midwives who, who catch the babies, who help shepherd new life into this world, and who provide meaningful support to parents. We're also, I also introduced a companion policy to a bill championed in the House by Representative Tai around abortion providers and who is able to provide abortion in Washington. What we're doing is codifying two previous Attorney General opinions that say that advanced practice registered clinicians, so ARNPs and physician's assistants, are able to provide abortion in Washington. That's already practiced, but we want to make sure it's protected in the law because, as I said before, and as you all know watching the news, there are states who are constantly attacking our right to reproductive freedom in the country, including our neighbors in Idaho that just passed the same oppressive ban that passed in Texas. And we know we're already seeing patients from Idaho and other states come to Washington to receive care. And we want to make sure that our system of care is as strong as possible. Another really important reproductive justice bill is Doulas for All, which is sponsored by Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley, that we will be moving out of Healthcare Committee in the Senate on Monday. And it's a bill to create an optional licensure for doulas, birth doulas, so that we can work towards getting Medicaid reimbursement, so that anyone who chooses to have a doula present at their birth will be able to get coverage for it, which is so important and such a birth justice issue, and one that I'm proud to work on for all birthing people in Washington.
All right, thanks for that question, Marilyn. Before I move on to our next one, I want to remind folks who've just joined us that you can drop questions or comments for the senator in the chat or on Twitter or on YouTube, wherever you may be viewing. Our next question is also actually a Facebook comment from Skyla, who asked, what is the update on your apprenticeship bill?
Thanks for that question, Skyla. I'm so excited about our work around apprenticeship this year. And I think many of you know, but Washington is a national leader in strong apprenticeship programs. In fact, in 2020, we had 20,000 apprentices enrolled in Washington apprenticeships and 2,000 different programs. We are innovating. We have new apprenticeships. In addition to the tried and true building trades apprenticeships, we have new and innovative apprenticeships around behavioral health, around education, around technology with programs like Apprenti. It's really an incredible way to allow folks to earn while they learn and to build into strong living wage careers and help meet our high demand fields, the staffing needs of our high demand fields. What we also need is wider, more permeable pathways for folks who have gone through apprenticeship programs and are now journey workers to pursue and pivot in their career, pursue other career paths if necessary. You know, my dad was an apprentice at the shipyard before you graduated Olympic College with an associate's degree. So when my dad blew out his knees and couldn't crawl around in the belly of a ship anymore, he had to pivot into an office job. But because he didn't have any college experience, he would have had to start at the beginning in order to get a career, a degree. And that meant that while, he was able to do good work in the shipyard, Code 250, for the rest of his career, there were college grads who were passing him by for promotions and able to grow. And what we want is to make sure that everyone who has completed an apprenticeship gets credit for the many hours of learning that they've spent, for the related supplemental instruction that they take in the classroom, so that if the market or their personal life changes, they're able to not start from the beginning to get a degree that will allow them to keep growing or pivoting in their career. This is so important, and really valuing the education that our apprenticeship programs provide. It passed off, Senate Bill 5764 passed off the Senate floor unanimously, and it was a really exciting win for apprenticeship programs, for journey card workers, for folks who, may not take the standard, straight line career trajectory. We want to ensure that folks can move in and out of different career programs, different education systems in Washington, and still get credit. It's super exciting work, and work that's required a lot of partnerships from employers, from our four-year institutions, from our State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, from apprentices and journey workers. And I think it's a really strong bill and is moving through the House. There's also a partner bill sponsored by Senator Kaiser, 5600, that does more work around how we grow the number of apprenticeship programs in Washington and how we invest in that innovation and ensure that folks have the wraparound services that they need while they're in an apprenticeship program to be able to continue to buy their equipment and get access to childcare and all the things that we want to fund, so that we have a more diverse pool of a workforce in the future, because we still see women and people of color underrepresented in our apprenticeship programs.
Cool. Thank you for that question, Skyla, and thank you, Senator, for that information. Our next question was sent in by Cal from Port Orchard. You've talked about this a little bit, but he's wondering if you can explain a little more about your Tacoma Narrows Bridge toll reduction bill.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Cal. And, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge was financed in a way that no other infrastructure project has been financed in Washington. And it was done in a way that all of my colleagues in the Senate Transportation Committee and legislature will admit was a way that we'll never finance something again. We recognize the mistake in the way that this bridge was funded. And the bill that I introduced to pay off the Tacoma Narrows Bridge debt entirely was about recognizing the inequity of leaving toll payers responsible for the entirety of the cost. For folks who don't follow this carefully, though I know that a lot of our constituents do, the bridge's total construction cost was $729 million. And we have paid almost that already. But because of the debt services and the way the financing was structured, the ultimate cost will be 1.48 billion when total financing is considered. And so we're not there yet. We're about halfway. So I introduced a $700 million plus bill that would have paid off the bridge debt and remove the tolls. And while we couldn't quite get there, what we were able to do, and that no one has been able to do before, is to get commitment to lower the bridge tolls for hardworking families. So what we're doing is reducing the bridge tolls by 75 cents for single axle vehicles. And that means, cars and motorcycles, folks who use the bridge to drive back and forth across the Narrows for work, for the doctor, for school, to see family. And for those people who do drive across Monday through Friday, in 1 month, they'll save a significant amount of money. And in a year, that's $180. And that's just one person driving back and forth across the bridge. We know we have some families where 2 or 3 members of their family commute, a student to school, both parents to work. We have folks who are commuting to Joint Base Lewis McChord. And this is an essential way that we're putting money back in the pockets of community members, and also allowing for more folks to choose to invest in their money and small businesses on the peninsula. Because I do hear from a lot of folks who say, I'd like to go to Gig Harbor for brunch, or for, to shop, or, visit, Port Gamble on the north part of the peninsula, but I don't want to pay the tolls to go back, to come back the other way. And so this is really important for small businesses. It's really important for our workforce. It's really important for folks in our community. And I'm so excited that we're going to be able to get it done this year.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator. And thank you so much to all the folks who have sent in comments either ahead of time or live during this call. I think if you would like, Senator, I'll kick it over to you for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah. And big thanks to all of my team, to Sarah, to Cam, to Alexia, and Hannah, who have helped us navigate this great way for you to be engaged in a virtual session. And thanks, John, for tuning in, and thanks to all of you for spending a little bit of your Saturday morning with me, or for those of you who watch later, for tuning in on your time. I miss our chances to have town halls in person and to be able to be in big groups and community together, but those are coming. And I think also in the future, we'll keep having virtual town halls in addition to in-person town halls, because it's an important way for us to allow folks to connect on their terms and to join from your couch, whether or not you have childcare, to tune in later. So thank you for weathering these last 2 years as a community, for looking out for each other, for staying engaged, for using your voice to ensure that your neighbors have what they need, and for advocating for a healthier Washington for all of us. I'm really honored to be able to do this work with you, to be your voice, to lift up your voice in Olympia, and to be of service. And keep sending in those questions and those comments. Your perspective on policy makes me a better policymaker, and I look forward to providing another update for you later in session. And for folks who are not tracking that, we're about, March 10th is the last day of this legislative session. So the clock is ticking for us to get as much done for community as possible. And I'm excited to keep serving you in Olympia. Hope you have a great Saturday.